hit that link. All right.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for chiming in. So obviously it's Councillor Brent Harris here with the City of St. John, and we've been doing some of these live discussions. And just by the way, if you hear some children in the background who are a little bit irate at the moment, it's because their mother has said it is bedtime. And when you're 2 years old and 4 years old, that's tragic. So anyway, they should be good in a minute. But so we've been doing these Facebook Lives for a while, and what I'm hoping to accomplish with them is just to continue some of the momentum that I felt was growing in our city around engagement, around a number of issues. It's hard to keep up with council stuff. I try to reduce things to bite-sized packages when I can, and then I also try to bring in guests once in a while who I feel can add value to the conversation and teach us something. And I always hope that those conversations lead to action and better outcomes and take us further and faster if we need to as a city. So tonight I'm going to bring in our guest, Dev Dobson. So just let me bring that up here now. So here is Dev. Hi, Dev. So Dev's an advocate for people living on the margins and people who are struggling with poverty, as well as people who have struggles with different disabilities around hearing impairment it's the blind. Sorry, not hearing impairment.
Currently it's with hard of hearing. Yes.
It is hard of hearing. Sorry, now I'm getting backwards. Sorry, my bad. But Deb, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, what got you involved, and what we want to get into tonight a little bit.
Sure. So I'm Deb, obviously. I'm going to say, so I'm not here professionally, although currently I do work with individuals who are hard of hearing. But I am here personally with my own experience working in the nonprofit sector over the last 10 years. I currently call myself a social equity advocate. And so equity obviously means that instead of everyone getting the same, everyone gets what they need. And so that's what I think we need to do with our population currently. So I'm here to speak on my experience with marginalized communities as a worker. I've worked with homeless communities in the city. I've worked with people struggling with addiction, victims of domestic violence. I've worked with teenage parents who are living in poverty, youth in crisis, people with disabilities. And personally, I have lived through some extreme poverty and even homelessness at times. And I've had to navigate the supports and the systems that are out there. And I've been able to find, lots of holes where people just sort of fall through the cracks. And so I'm really excited to be here and be able to talk to you about what I have seen and learned over the last years.
Yeah, no, I thank you for chiming in tonight. Obviously, you reached out just shortly after the campaign, and right around the time when I had a conversation with disabilities advocate Caitlin Layden, who has been doing a fair bit of work with a number of organizations, and now, from what I understand, she's starting her own business as a consultant. Mm-hmm. And so that to me was, communities like yours that you've been a part of were some of the most responsive to me when I was campaigning. Mm-hmm. And so I just felt like it was a critical place to start with, how do we build the city better? How do we go into the next 4 years of council and make good decisions through good lenses to address some of the most severe problems? And in many cases, as you said, there are lots of groups, or a large population of St. John that haven't suffered equally under the pandemic, nor have they suffered equally under the years of high poverty rates and low jobs and high unemployment, and things like that. So I guess that's a good starting point for us tonight. Is that's what we're trying to accomplish. We want people to understand these issues better. We want them to see how the decisions the city makes runs downhill and can affect things for good or for bad. So maybe start with some of your own story. You mentioned that you have had to navigate some of these systems that the city proper doesn't offer, but are offered by nonprofits and organizations within the city. Some of them would receive municipal funding. We might flush out some of the differences between provincial jurisdiction and municipal jurisdiction at some point. But why don't you just give us just a high level take on what your experience was navigating that and what happened and things like that, if you don't mind sharing.
Oh, sure. I'm pretty open with things that I've been through, and so I guess, and I know, like you say, it's not all coming from the city, and it is hard to kind of make those distinctions and who's in charge of what, and that's a big part of why it's difficult, I think, to navigate through what you might need when you're in a situation like this. And I guess I would say what I noticed the most is just that there's such a disconnect between everyone, between all of the organizations that help, between the government, between the province and the city, social development, and everybody does their own thing, but nobody sort of communicates. And so when you're in this situation where you're living in crisis, where you're literally fighting every day just to have somewhere to sleep or something to eat, to be able to get so deep into research and find out who you go to and where you go to and what you have to do to get what you need and what kind of support you need in that moment is just such a stretch. When you might not have access to even something like the internet or just a safe place to be and think for a second. And so it's very, very difficult to figure out what to do, where to go, what is out there. And it seems that a large percentage of even the services that are out there that are supposed to help feel almost unreachable, just with the prerequisites that you need, the information that you need, or the availability that you need to have in order to get those things. And so it's just it's very difficult for people who are already impacted to the point where day-to-day life is not consistent or stable, to try and sort of crawl out of that. And the only reason I was able to navigate through it is because I had been working professionally with these systems for so long before the thing happened in my life that caused me to end up in that situation. And most people just don't have that behind them. And so it's very difficult. Even the people I've helped and told, and I can say, these are all the things you can do. And even with laying it all out, it's still just so much work. And if you get turned away in one spot, it puts you back so far. So there's just sort of a disconnect there, like I said, between what's available and where you can go for things. And there just needs to be maybe a more cohesive sort of support system out there for everybody who needs it, for whatever reason. I think our citizens in St. John all deserve to not just exist, but thrive, and just be able to not worry constantly.
And so you would say that currently as it exists, because one of the things I've noticed compared with cities like St. John compared to Moncton and Fredericton is it does seem like Moncton and Fredericton, I mean, those are our comparisons. They're not necessarily fair in all ways because, we're an industrial town and we're a heritage town. We're old. And to be honest, those cities wouldn't exist if it wasn't for St. John.
Right.
So we have a whole slew of problems that are hard to compare. Maybe Halifax is better comparison in some ways, but it does seem like other cities have been flat-footed on certain issues, where the city of St. John has had some fairly mature organizations that have responded well. I think of Coverdale, you know,
Mhm.
the Center for Women and women's who are struggling with homelessness or domestic abuse situations. Outflow Men's Shelter and the work that they've done to become a 24-hour shelter during the pandemic, and
Mhm.
some of the wraparound programming that they do, you know, Avenue B, and some of the churches around that put on meals and stuff. It does seem like we've had better social infrastructure in the city of St. John. But it sounds to me like you're saying when you were in that, it was still very hard to navigate and wasn't always, you didn't always get a good outcome because of that difficulty.
Yeah, and so I'm obviously familiar with all of those organizations you've mentioned. I've worked with some of them,
Right.
Frontlines. I worked at Coverdale for a good number of years at the emergency shelter. So women could show up at any time, the middle of the night. They could show up for one night, they could show up for a month. It was really very all encompassing for women in the city. But that being said, uh, is still very limited. At the time I was there, we could hold 10 people. And at that time, Outflow didn't exist yet. It was only just starting. I was involved with sort of the growing up of Outflow. I volunteered back when it was just barbecues in King Square.
Mm-hmm.
When we were trying to set up this building on Waterloo Street and
Yep.
demolishing it and trying to set up showers and sinks. And there were so many good ideas, and everything just sort of evolved as it went. But at the time, like I said, there was space for 10 women. There was nowhere for men. There was a shelter just coming up for youth. And
Was that Safe
even
Harbor?
now, Safe Harbor, yeah. And so I've worked with them as well. And again, they're, space for roughly 10 people. And you need to already be so far in your journey to sort of be appropriate for places like that. And so there
Right.
are a lot of people who still get left behind, not just because of the low numbers and availability. At Coverdale, we would work alone, one person for up to 10 women. There's, no support from other staff. You can only stay open for so many hours because, it's a nonprofit and the funding just isn't always there. And so the things that we could do to help people were still very limited in that sense. And there was so many things that we just had to say, there's nothing we can do. And we're kind of the last stop. There's nowhere to go from here. And
Mm-hmm.
so the problem is, I think, is that the people, one step past nonprofit, we'll say people in organizations and in government and things just don't always understand the reality of what people are living with. That they haven't been through it, they haven't seen it, and so it just doesn't really register the real everyday sort of challenges that a lot of people in this city are living with. I was taking a look on your website and on the council priorities and different things, and I saw that it says the median wage in St. John is $55,000 a year. And so, that means half of the population is living under that, and a good number of them, like, drastically under that. The living wage was decided by, I didn't even write down who did that study. Sorry,
That's
but
the
it was
that's the Human Development Council with Randy's group,
right.
Randy Hatfield's group.
Yeah. So they calculated the living wage in St. John for roughly 40,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're saying half of the people probably are close to under that.
Oh yeah.
And, just that is just not acceptable. First of all, it's not realistic. It's just not sustainable if we want our society to continue to grow. And so I see these things in the council priorities that they want to grow, but it focuses on things like growing the business and growing the population, and affordable housing and recreation and beautifying things and more transport and more revenue. And that's all fine and good, but the people that I'm speaking with aren't so much going to be affected by most of those things. Those aren't going to help the large percentage of the population that really needs the most right now. And unfortunately, it feels like when considerations are made for where help should go, it's more numbers and statistics and sort of, you can sort of feel good saying that half of the people in St. John make over 55,000, but then just ignore the ones who are under that, and that's lots of working families, that's lots of children, that's lots of lots and lots of people who aren't even coming close to just being able to survive. And with the way, prices for everything has raised and rent has raised and groceries and gas and all of these things, we see right now with our QP unions, some of what a lot of people in St. John would consider well-paid workers are saying that they're not even able to survive on what they're getting. And so that leaves such a large percentage of people not even up to that level. And the old get a better job or go back to school, that's just not realistic. That's not reality. That's not how it actually works. Many of us have gone back to school. We have gotten better jobs, and it still hasn't kept up with just what it costs to actually survive in this society.
Yeah. And so one of the things I hear you pushing back on, and I think it's a fair point, it's something that I struggle with even on council myself, is, I've historically been on the outside trying to push for and be an activist or an advocate on things, whether it be housing or living wage or climate change action, whatever it was. But now that I'm on the inside and I have a governance role to play, I hear some of these narratives assumed by the privileged,
Right.
either whether they be our staff, and God love our staff, they work really hard, but they are well paid to do that work, well paid.
Right.
Many of our staff would certainly exceed the baseline living wage, and that's not a minimum wage. And I see a little question from Russell Duthright. He just asked, what does that mean? I'm not sure what the question is there, Russell, but if you want to clarify, it's a little hard for me to comment because I'm on my tablet and my fingers will be all over the screen like this. So I'll just cue you to kind of chime in there a little differently. But you're pushing back on that narrative that exists that a lot of people assume is true, which is a rising tide lifts all boats. So you pointed out the council priorities, and I had a part to play in shaping that, and I basically fired every bullet I had.
I can definitely see your input there in those things.
Well, I fired every bullet I had on the affordable housing piece. And it's not that the others aren't important, and the other councillors are intelligent people, and they have their assessment, they look at things and they think, well, this is what I think we need to do. At the same time, that narrative is that rising tide will lift all boats. So if we grow that population and we create more jobs and we do all this stuff, everybody will do better. But what I hear you saying is not necessarily, and possibly not at all.
Not necessarily, and definitely not, almost not at all.
Right. So what's the miss here? What do you feel is like the city of St. John has about $162 million budget this year. 50% of it is gone before we even speak about doing anything with just emergency services, police and fire. Right. And we're an industrial city, so we have a high risk assessment when it comes to fire. So our firefighters need resources to be able to tackle some of that. So we do have to pay more for fire services in other cities. And we don't necessarily get a different shake from the province to do so. But with the rest of that budget, right, there's things we can do, initiatives we can take. you know, groups we can support. So what is the miss that you're seeing, and why is it that not necessarily all boats rise when we have a rising tide?
Well, I think the thing is, these sort of priorities and these goals that are coming out here are looking to raise the tide of, let's say, the city as a whole, again, of the median income or the revenue or things like stats, more businesses, more immigration, more people moving to the city. But these things are not, again, focusing on those ones who, as those things rise, are being left where they are, and which ultimately puts them in a worse position than they were before, as you know, the areas are gentrifying and as rents are raising and as all of these things are going up, and like we're saying that we want to fight for a living wage, but actually nobody's talking about a living wage. Nobody's talking about $20 an hour. People are fighting over $15 an hour, and most of the time not full time, no benefits, there's no real regulations. Like I noticed even the provincial government is begging for laundry services workers, and in the interest of job creation, they put out multiple casual positions. They don't guarantee people hours. They don't offer what was considered a living wage. They're expecting you to be available at all times and to just be able to sort of not plan your life ahead of time and just be there when you're needed, without the guarantee of even knowing that you're going to get full-time hours or a full paycheck. And so I don't understand how they're expecting people to jump at this opportunity. They say things like, nobody wants to work. I guarantee you people want to work, but nobody wants to work in order to not be able to survive. This strike is happening, and I stand behind the unionized workers. I stand behind the people who should be getting paid to take care of our city and our province in the way that they do. But they are already doing so much better than the people I'm used to working with, and this rising tide, unfortunately, will look at the statistics and the numbers, and they'll think we have more businesses this year, so the city is doing better. But that's just not looking at all of the other people who aren't doing better, who are in fact doing worse at this point. It almost feels like those people who are under in that bottom half are just not really considered, because as long as they bring that median up, that's what matters. And it needs to be, we need to look at people over profits. We need to look at making sure everybody is brought up out of poverty and is able to have a living wage, and not just the people who are lucky enough to be part of a union or start out in a better position where they're able to, say, go to university or have a job with a good company waiting for them, or have parents who can help them when things get difficult. Not everybody has all of that, and our system is set up right now where if you don't have almost every support that's available, you're just not going to make it. And I just feel like that bottom half gets ignored.
Right. So I just want to drill into that some here. So we're talking about the wrong measurables, like we're measuring the wrong stuff, because what I hear you saying is a lot of the decisions that the city is making is looking at metrics where it's like, well, if we just put more people into the pot, and we put more businesses into the pot, and we put more higher wage jobs into the pot, it'll bring up the measurables that we measure. It'll bring them up higher and make us look better. Meanwhile, we've been struggling with the highest child poverty rate in the country for the better part of 20 years.
Right.
And so it is a question, right, as to, are we measuring the right things?
Right.
And who's getting left behind, and who's going to do something about it? And so when it comes to people with disabilities, you know, I know Caitlin was on here before talking about, you know, there's 23% of people in Canada that identify as having some sort of disability, whether you see it or not. And they certainly have a much higher bar to overcome,
Right.
just to begin that participation in the what we call the normal life of way of things. But what are some of the impediments that you see with the people that you're working with? So there's jobs available right now. Like, I can tell you, I do training programs out of the tool library for people who need just baseline education to work in the trades. But I don't see a lot of uptake in taking that training. And it's new. I don't chalk that up to any failure. Well, maybe on me personally, but I don't chalk it up to anybody not wanting to work. I don't go around saying, people just don't want to work. They're home on CERB. I certainly don't believe that for 1 second. So it's an awareness thing, but there's lots of jobs in the trades right now. There's lots of jobs in a couple of sectors right now. I know restaurants have a hard time finding servers. Do you think it's just the wages, or are there other barriers that you see that are in the way there for people to participate in the economy that exists?
I do think a good part of it is the wages, but also, things like hours, if you're going to be getting full-time hours. If even with a free training program, and I have personally suggested your program to people, so it's not a failure, but I do think that there is, again, a lack of information out there, maybe, or a lack of knowing how to find the information that is out there, that just not everybody knows about it, or all of the options. And then even with a free program, they're then left with some knowledge and some experience and an ability to say, get an apprenticeship with a trades company. But that still sets you at, with a good number of companies in the city, $12 to $13 an hour for, a good amount of years, until you can either take more block tests, get a red seal, start your own business, or any number of other ways to move up in those sort of areas. And that's just not going to cut it. That's just not going to cut it when you look at the rental prices, even for a 1-bedroom. And they say, there are lots of jobs out there, but you shouldn't have to have 3 or 4 of them to be able to pay your bills. And so, unfortunately, as you can see with the strike, if working is not of value to your life, if you're just spending more time worried about working all of your time away and still not able to live the lifestyle and have the days to relax and be able to do things like recreational activities on the weekends, or be able to get your kids the birthday present they want, or just the basic things in life that people have come to expect in this society, you're just not going to want to spend all of your time making someone else money. With the cost of everything, with this strike, again, like I was starting to say earlier, I very much support these workers, but it has put me in a position now where my kids being home is going to cost me an extra $800 a month to have them in daycare for a few more hours. And it was already, over $1,200 for 3 children. And I'm telling you, even a full-time job at $1,300 an hour doesn't cover that, let alone rent and car payments and gas and food. And so I honestly think all of those jobs that are out there, they can't find workers because they're not making it worth it for those workers. Nobody wants to go out and, work themselves, even just in retail, or even just at a restaurant, as people think are low skilled, or however they want to describe those things. Just nobody wants to spend 40 hours a week doing that, not being able to see their family, see their kids, and then not having any control over what they do in their spare time. And I think this plan here is good, but it feels very short term. let's say having more numbers, more people moving in, more businesses, that's all fine and good. But if we don't have more of the population able to spend their money on those things and able to actually participate in the economy in a meaningful way, then it's not sustainable. You know, if half of our population cannot shop at your business, cannot go to your store, it's not going to survive. And so we can't continue to benefit what I would say at this point is even upper middle class and higher, and leaving everyone else to fall behind, because those people under that are what is going to support those businesses, what going to keep you paying your bills. And if they can't, it doesn't, you know, it just doesn't keep going.
Yeah. No, I think you're coming on something here that's I want to land on for a few minutes and just run with, and then there's a couple of things here that I want to speak to in the comments, but then I want to drill into some of these. Sorry, my camera's over here, and I'm used to it being over on the other side. I want to drill into some of these council priorities and how the rubber's going to meet the road, and what are we hoping the outcomes are. And I have to tell you, you know, this was a challenging exercise for me as somebody who's lived on the margins. But I'm still a white male. I still have lots of privilege and still have many advantages. But I have lived in situations where paycheck to paycheck and rents, even what I was paying 2 years ago, were unaffordable some months. So I come from some lived experience, and I've had lots of neighbors and relationships with people who have been in those. So I'm with you. Like, I think that these priorities are good. They're setting us in a trajectory. I certainly support them, but I constantly wonder, what are we going to come up with initiatives to make sure that the people most impacted are going to be beneficiaries of where the city puts its dollars? And I'm not so sure that we're doing enough to drill into that. Like, who is this initiative going to impact? And so let's get into this here a little bit. So we got Russell Doothright, who's on here, and he's saying this, and I want to dispel this myth. I want to take this one on, but Deb, if you want to take this one on too, you can come. We can share this one. So Russell says, one problem, let's say the minimum wage went from $12 to $15 an hour. However, the people that were making $15 an hour would say, supposedly they will say, oh, my job is more important than yours. I want $18 an hour. Then on and on until everybody's making too much money, and then we're always going to have the poor. And so my question is this: in what world do we think it's okay for the gap between ultra rich and poor to be so wide that some people can afford to buy literal islands and go to space, and some people don't even have the basic opportunity to get the education they need, to get the meal they need in the run of a week, and to have enough interventions in their life? So I think of me. I had many interventions in my life, and I was still brought up a middle-class kid. I had plenty of interventions that kept me from going with the wrong crowd, or from going downhill, or from missing opportunities. I had parents who pushed me. I had community members who pushed me, but there are people who don't have that at all. And so, Russell, I would just say this: we don't need to worry about pennies on the dollar for people who are making under $20 an hour. What we need to worry about is how our government and how our corporation, our municipalities, our provincial government, and our federal government incentivize businesses to be able to give bonuses with taxpayer money to corporate CEOs during a pandemic. And that's a fact. Corporations in Canada took billions of dollars in taxpayer money because we were in a pandemic, and gave bonuses to CEOs. And the government had no measures. The government had no controls in place to make sure it didn't happen. Admittedly, they're not bad people. I'm not going to throw the government under the bus. They didn't know what to expect. They didn't know what was going to happen. They were like, shoot, we got to do something. We're in a pandemic. We're not sending the people to work. Like, give them the benefit of the doubt here. But at the same time, let's not lose the main thing here. And the main thing is that some people work their tail off for $15 an hour, and their work is not valued as much. And we're seeing it with this strike, as Dev has said. Sorry, I'm getting a little fired up here. But But this thinking, it's like it's pitting us against each other.
Right.
And we don't need to be against each other. We can actually say we can do better. We can we can have better programs, better policies, and better governance that leads to less of that over there, which we don't like, and more of this over here, which we do. So anyway, Dev, I don't know if you have anything to add on that, but I saw that come up and I was just like, ooh, I gotta get into that.
I'm familiar with that feeling. I definitely get a bit heated when I say people or see people say things like that, and I understand. I think sort of the thought process behind that. If one person makes more, then everyone needs to make more. No, everyone has money to spend. Terrible. Honestly, I think that would be great for society as a whole if we want to continue to keep this level that we have. Keep this, get a higher level. We don't want to stay where we're at. Obviously, it's not working. But yes, everybody, $12, 15, even 18, they should all be making more. Everybody should be making more. If things are going to cost as much as they are, if the things that we're expected to need to survive are going to be so expensive, then yes, absolutely, everybody should be being paid enough to be able to afford that, to be able to have a basic life. And so absolutely, I think if you're making 15, you should make more. If you're making 18, you should make more, or the costs need to be regulated more than they are. I think the problem is, I'm just wondering, all of these, like you said, subsidies and things like corporations are being given money and organizations are being given money, but how does that translate to the actual people who need it getting it? And as we've seen with so many organizations and things over time, is that those large dollar amounts go to these people and they just don't make their way down. They make their way to CEOs and bonuses. They make their way to staff. They make their way to things like marketing and all of that, and they don't make their way down to the people who actually need it. And so I'm not sure what the answer to this is, but there needs to be a more direct, straight to the people who need it avenue to make this work, because unfortunately all of the stuff that's in place right now, things like tax breaks, things like getting money back at the end of the year, these are all things that are just available to people who already have the money. If you need to be able to prepay for something and then get reimbursed for it, that's not helping the people who don't have access to those things in the first place. And so while things like that sound great, and things like a tax credit for daycare sounds like such a good thing, if I already can't afford daycare, that doesn't help me. And so we need to find a way to make sure that everyone is at a livable wage, not a minimum wage, and not we need a universal income. I'll say those words, it's going to freak people out, but we need a base that everybody gets. And I see these arguments all the time, like McDonald's wasn't meant to be a career, it should only be for students. You're not supposed to make a living wage. But I don't see those people also saying, hey, we should only have restaurants open on evenings or weekends when only students are available. Everybody still wants to be able to access those things, but they want to act like the people who are working and providing those things for some reason don't deserve to be able to also afford to have them. And that's just, I don't know, like you said, I don't know if that's a compassion problem or a logic problem, or people just really don't understand how things have changed over the years. We can't buy houses for $2,000 anymore. We can't, can't start a business with $5,000 from our parents. Most of our parents don't even have $5,000 if we needed it.
Yeah.
It's just things are different than they were before, and so they need to change drastically at this point.
Yeah. Hey, did I go blank there for a second? Did my screen blank out?
Yeah. Well, I went full screen for a minute, but you were gone for a second there.
Okay. Thanks for carrying us. My screen just shut off, and I was like, "Oh my god, we lost the broadcast." Anyway, we're good. We're good. My battery's low, but it's not that low. So anyway, I plugged in. So sorry for that disruption, folks. But thanks for chiming in there, Deb. No, I think exactly as you're saying, we need to be able to challenge these narratives with better narratives and better explanations. And I think when we see a groundswell of people doing better and a groundswell of people doing worse, and that divide becoming wider, we need to say, okay, it's time to look at how we're doing things, how we're running things, who's in charge, who's at the table, who gets to make decisions. And one of the things that I think is better about this council than the previous council is that we do have more diversity at the table. And it's not that we didn't have great councillors before, but they were seemingly from one type of group, and from income levels or from age levels, experience levels, and so this council is a more diverse council with some of the benefits, excuse me, of having some veterans from before. So that's good. I think we're doing better, but we need people to be engaged on this stuff so that they start talking to people, and then there's people that feel like they can run for council or provincial government or whatever, that have these different perspectives, because ultimately, if we have more people in the process of decision making, we'll have better decisions made that that impact more of us. So I think what you're laying out there, Dev, is really good. Let me see here. Now, we were drilling into the council priorities, so I want to go there next. And I'm just give me 1 second to put my screen down. I'm sorry, I'm in a weird spot now. I'm near my plug. I'm just going to grab my piece of paper and bring it back. So just sorry for the disruption. All right, here we go. So we're back. I'm trying to put this on something stable so it's not bouncing around. Okay, so the council priorities are interesting because what they are is a look at what this council is valuing. And so what do we want staff to work on? And when staff when they come forward with initiatives, or when the city manager, who is, again, this is a bit of a municipal politics 101 course here for a second, but the city of St. John exists because the province said so. There's no requirement for the province to give. That's not entirely correct, and I'll tell you why in a second. But there's no requirement for the province of New Brunswick to have cities or municipalities or local service districts or anything. They just divide things up based on some sort of legislative precedent that happened sometime in the past. Interestingly, St. John predates Confederation, so we actually do have a royal charter that gives us certain rights and privileges that other cities don't. Ultimately, it boils down to nothing, though, as far as noticeable differences, except on paper there are differences. And I suppose if we wanted to go to the Supreme Court and challenge some of these things that are imposed on the city, we might win, but it's a lot of money, and why would we do that? Let's just figure out how to get along. But priorities are what the government, so the councillors, which I am one of 11, and I am not the spokesperson for council. That would be our mayor. I am just one councillor giving you his take on certain issues. And what we've laid out in these priorities are what we're hoping the outcomes are. So the priorities are broken down into a few buckets of issues. So we have, we'll just start at the top here. We have grow as the most, I'm not saying important, it's the grow bucket was the most voted on by councillors. So we all got together and we set out just our feelings, our thoughts, what we thought was important. And grow was the one that received the most votes from council as what we need to focus on. And in that bucket, we have things like, grow our population by 2% annually, develop, embrace, and reinforce a strong brand for the city, achieve 3% annual property tax growth, and work with partners to create opportunities to attract and grow businesses. So those would have been, that bucket, if you will, was what got the most attention from councillors, that they thought this is where we're going to do the best work we can for the citizens who elected us. The one who got the second, so the other bucket, the next bucket is belong. And this comes down to livability issues, whereas grow is kind of self-explanatory. What do we mean by belong? Well, we are trying to develop some better language around this issue of livability and how a city is livable. And we would have outcomes and objectives like strengthening our neighborhood groups, improving quality of life with long-term neighborhood planning. So some people be familiar with the Central Peninsula Plan the city adopted, which kind of drives the lens of development, lens of road reconstructions, the lens of business attraction and city initiatives in the Central Peninsula. But there's other neighborhoods, which our city is blessed actually to have neighborhoods that are delineated well and laid out well, and you can see the differences in them. Which is when we drive through Moncton, it's like, I don't know, did I just leave one neighborhood and enter into another? It just feels like a big sprawl, like suburb in some ways, until you get right down into the middle of town. And then you're like, okay, I guess this is a city now. So no offense to Moncton, but we do have some just because we're such an old city and cities were built differently back then.
Yeah.
So there's a desire to facilitate a mix of affordable housing. Now, this is where I just spent all my time as a councillor, because I saw what, Dev, you've brought up in a few situations here. These rising rents are now no longer just affecting people living on the margins. They're affecting me. They're affecting, I saw Councillor Killen, and she chimed in with a question earlier, which I want to come back to. It's affected Councillor Killen. It's affected lots of people in our community, and we need to have an answer for that. Although the city of St. John doesn't have, we can't just say, yes, we're going to do this. Because we have to go to the province first and get their permission to do anything. So that's an impediment that we have. And the province doesn't always want to play game or play ball, as you've seen, Dev, with this strike, as we've seen with, Premier Higgs basically saying we don't need to do anything about this crisis for housing. I don't want to say don't do anything, but the programs they have are the same as they had 2 years ago. And the problem is the problems are not the same as we've had 2 years ago. And then there's other ones around moving, so transportation, performance, which is about how the city performs and measures things. Green, it's really interesting to see a green priority for the city of St. John as an industrial city with Canada's largest oil refinery in it. It's kind of exciting to see that. As well as, am I missing one? Oh my gosh, hold on a sec. Grow, green, belong, move, and perform. No, that's all of them. So I say that, it's like, okay, that's the teaching 101, but I want to go a little bit further into this. Now, the city spends money on things all the time to do livability stuff, to do events, to try to promote the city, to try to promote our quality of life. Are there any very basic things, Dev, that you've noticed that would fall within those categories of this is absolutely the city's responsibility that we're missing, that you've picked up on over the years in dealing with clients and friends and neighbors and things like that?
You mean in that list specifically?
No, that was the priorities list. I just wanted to make sure people are aware, because I want to talk about some of the priorities as we go. But I just mean like city writ large, the city overall, what are some pretty major misses that are there right now? And I guess, are there things that we do get right? Are there things that are working, that hit those people that we're talking about, which are the people who are the 50% and 60% making under that median wage or under the 40,000 livable wage?
So I guess my first question, it does relate to these sort of priorities, because as we said, we've gone through all that, and climate change is really exciting. Transportation is something that we obviously desperately need a better system of here in the city, and growing businesses, growing population, that's all very important. But the only one out of those things that really does deal with anyone who's struggling the most currently would be affordable housing. And I just want to know what that actually means. Has there been any numbers? Because it feels like all of these things are very much, they're worded very politically. So they're all
Bureaucratically.
just sort of
Yeah.
fluffy words that don't
Yeah.
say a whole lot. And so I wonder
Mhm.
what affordable housing means. Affordable to who? I wonder
Yep.
who they're consulting when deciding what affordable means. Are they talking affordable to $55,000 earners, or are they talking affordable to everyone who lives within the city? So what does that look like?
Right.
In
Yeah, no, good question. And that's another way we can do this too. Like if there's stuff where you're like, look, this is happening now and we need to do it better because it's hurting people and it's hurting the poorest most. I'd love to hear more from you on that. But then specifically to this question, if there's things in the priorities that are like, well, what does that mean? Happy to try to unpack that. So the city of St. John didn't have an affordable housing action plan, or doesn't still. We
Right.
are developing one now. It was requested by the mayor, I believe, under the last council, so Don Darling, and adopted by council writ large. So the rest of council would have been like, yep, we agree. And then under this council is when it actually got its legs to start. And so the action plan, what it's trying to do is lay out, okay, what are the needs of housing in St. John? As you said, so affordable housing does not mean subsidized housing. It doesn't mean this is where somebody's going to live who makes $26,000 a year on disability payments, and they only have to pay $240 of their $650 or whatever it is to rent, and the government pays the rest. That's subsidized housing, and there's other people who qualify for subsidized housing, and that isn't it. That is not this. So affordable housing kind of picks up right after that. It's like, okay, subsidized housing is a unique thing. It is in the affordable housing continuum, but that's all this province has had for an answer for the last 50 years is subsidized housing. The problem is what happens if you live somewhere and the median wage is $53,000 a year for a household, right? And the average cost of housing means you're spending 40 to 50% of your income on what's available to you because that's not affordable. So why aren't we promoting development that's cheaper? Why aren't there more mixed units? Why aren't there, what we would call transitionary housing, or what we would call social housing, where it's not subsidized, but maybe the terms of ownership. So, for example, it's literally impossible almost in this province now to start a cooperative unless somebody who's got a big wad of cash, $50,000 to $60,000 in their bank, can bring 20 or 15 people into a room and say, hey, I want to spearhead a co-op. I've got the money to do it. You can't find funding. The province has no funding streams for co-ops. The city has no bank to borrow from to start co-ops, and banks won't talk to you because usually if we need housing, we don't have a lot of job security, or if we do, we don't make a lot of money. So then the banks are saying you don't qualify. So back in the 80s, it was quite possible there were incentives for co-ops. Now there's not. And so this needs assessment is what we're starting with for this affordable housing piece, to say, okay, let's do a little bit more of a deeper dive. So the committee that's going through this has about 20 some odd stakeholders who are working across the spectrum on people living with homelessness, people who are like builders, developers, nonprofit agencies that build. So those stakeholders are basically the committee, and they are hiring consultants to do the work, to say, go and learn about the demographics, the cost of housing, what's available, the turnover rate, and come back to us with a bunch of data so that we know here's where we need housing, here's the demographic that's missed, and here are some suggestions on where to build next or how to build. Once we have the needs assessment, then that committee's going to bat that around and say, okay, how do we incentivize the right development? What might that look like? And where's the land that we need to build? Because we don't need to add more subsidized housing to the Old North End or Crescent Valley, right?
Right.
Because we've oversaturated those neighborhoods and they're not resilient with it when they're that way. So that's the affordable housing piece. And honestly, it's not done. We won't know until about March, and it's too late. There's a lot of people that have already been hurt, and it sucks. I don't know how else to say that except it sucks. It's good we're doing something, but we're we're too late. We faced this pandemic, and all of a sudden everybody wanted to move here because we had cheap housing, and it's really,
and it is cheap housing when you compare it to, maybe some other places and
yes,
some other wages from other places. But for us here, it's absolutely not. I just got back from Alberta. I spent some time out there recently, and their wages are, we'll say, considerably higher even for low wage workers. Their taxes considerably lower, and I was looking at apartments that are available out there compared to what we have here, and their prices were, I'll say, the same, and a lot of times even less than what we're being expected to pay here now. My rent has more than tripled since 2010.
Wow.
Wages definitely have not. Absolutely have not. The minimum wage itself has not come close to that. And the cost of everything else also has gone up so much. And even things like my hourly pay is now double what it was in 2010, but my take home is not even close. Barely a difference in the money that you actually have to show for what has been done. And so I wonder, with this affordable housing, this needs assessment, like you said, people are being hired to go out and to find information about these areas and these demographics, but how many of the people on these committees are actually from those areas? How many of those people live through these situations and actually have experienced these things firsthand? Not just going in to ask some people or to look at some things, but people who actually have been there. And I find, so many committees and so many boards and so many, if you go up and look, the board members for just about anything out there, you're going to see a bunch of people standing there in suits and ties and dresses and business suits and making all of their decisions. But the real people in the city who the decisions are being made about need to be involved in these situations, in these conversations, because if you don't have that worldview, if you don't have that experience, you're not going to understand. You're not going to know what needs to be done to change things, and you're not going to see the big picture. Like I said, a lot of these things feel very short term,
right?
And they feel like they're just not getting as close as they need to. And unfortunately, we're at a point where it's almost too late. If people even were making what they call the living wage of $40,000 a year, or almost $20 an hour, even with that, what they're calling an average rent right now for a 3-bedroom at $1,000, which I will tell you, I haven't been able to actually find one at that price. That's low compared to what you see realistically, but even that is half of your wages at $20 an hour.
Yep.
And how many people here make $20 an hour? It just doesn't happen. And so at this point, I make what I would consider good money for St. John. Like I said, my dollar amount has doubled in the last 10 years, but my rent is 60% of my income, at least. And childcare, the same. And that leaves me already with nothing, plus car and food and recreation and all of these things that, now I can't provide my kids with a life that they should be able to get with what on paper looks like a good wage, but realistically does not translate to that. And so we need to have so many people, more people involved. We need to not just be going to the areas, but actually taking people from those areas and being part of these decisions, because it's just so hard when people say things that are just so unrealistic, like go back to school. I did that. Get a better job. I did that. All of these things that people say are going to move you up the ladder. I've done all of that, but the ladder keeps moving. We still haven't made it to the bottom rung because it just keeps going higher and higher. And we're just leaving so many people behind that it's just, I don't see how the economy can thrive when most people who should be contributing to it can't. They can't be involved in in any of it, and it's just not, it's not going to be sustainable long term. And all of these rent increases are all great for landlords until a large percentage of people are homeless because they can't afford it, and now those landlords aren't making the money anymore. And so we're going to come to a crash sooner than later if something isn't done, and something big.
Yeah. No, I one of the takeaways that I'm hearing you saying is the city needs to find a way where there is diversity on our agencies, boards, commissions, and committees. So the city has, I forget the number, I think it's 37, it might be 52. I just got two numbers in my head, but they're guesses, kind of informed guesses of agencies, boards, commissions, and committees. And they would basically be created by council to inform council. And there's a couple of committees, right, that would be made up of the demographic. But what I hear you saying is that we need to seriously consider a bylaw or some sort of policy around those ABCs, if you call them that, that informs the type of people we pick, because the selection committee is a committee of council, and the selection committee vets all of the resumes and applications. And of course, who are the people who hear about the openings for the different boards or committees? Right. It's the people who have access to information and access to networks. And so it's a miss. And because of that, we're not getting strong proposals from these ABCCs, at least not proposals that have buy-in from the communities we're trying to help.
Right, exactly. And even then, I've looked into the different committees and the different boards, and I've applied for some of them. And, a small percentage of them do say they want so many members who are living in these situations. And normally it's like, 2 out of 10 or something. But then they also want those people to also have so much, professional experience and all of this stuff that it's like, we're going to give this position to someone who can say that they struggled more than the other people, but still not realistically, the people who have really lived really marginalized lives, and the amount of them that do ask for those people and actually do accept them and bring them in is just not where it needs to be. There needs to be, any group who a decision is being made about should be at least
in the room
50% of the representation of people who are making that decision, and absolutely in the room, if nothing else. But more than that, they need to be involved.
Right.
They need to be part of that. It just doesn't make sense that someone else who doesn't understand the situation can decide how that situation needs to be handled.
No, it's good. So that's a good takeaway. We're up to a little over an hour here. I agree. I think so we're here because we haven't had the right people at the table. We have the city we have because we've had a certain type of people at the table. Right. And I'm not going to say the city is, defunct writ large, but I will agree with you 100% that I see my role as council as how do I plow a road for people who don't have an opportunity to give voice to some of this stuff,
right?
And who need to, because they're the ones on the front lines or the ones facing that issue. So no, I think those are really good points. I hope that what happens is we have these conversations. First of all, people don't get a chance to see. That hasn't happened very often, at least in my read on municipal politics in St. John. So they don't happen very often, and certainly they don't happen very often from just councillors, maybe the mayor, but not from
honestly,
councillors.
Most people don't know the difference between council and provincial. That most people don't know what everybody does and who handles any of it or how it all.
Yeah.
So getting that out there is great. Social media is really good for that in that sense, because there needs to be more public discussions for sure.
Yeah. And so I want to keep these kind of conversations going. So I really appreciate you coming tonight, sharing some of that passion and stories with us, because it's going to be the thing that convinces people to engage. If they
Mhm.
see stuff like this happening, with people like you and I talking about it, then I hope they'll say, okay, well, actually, let's talk about it then, and sign me up. Where do I go? But so many people don't even vote because they're like, they don't care about us. Why would I go and vote for any of them? I don't know them. I don't care about them. And I get that sentiment. The last election had, below 50% turnout. So I have 8,400 votes in a city of 72,000 people to represent, and it's like, dude, that's not much of a mandate.
Right, right. But
it's
I mean, it was still
it's
that's frustrating, right? And
Yeah.
but so many people just feel so left out,
Mm.
and unheard and uncared for, and it feels like we'll go out and we'll vote and we'll still get the same thing we've been getting. We'll still get them focusing on things like more businesses or bringing in new people to live here when the people who live here already aren't being cared for. And so why even bother? And it's such a hard place to be, because honestly, if you're living in a city where the general consensus is nobody cares and why even try,
Right.
that's just not what you want. That's not what anyone wants, and we shouldn't have to feel that way. Nobody should have to feel that way. And so I'm really glad that you guys are reaching out, and I just hope that there's some way to actually put things into practice. And obviously I can't really speak to the politics behind it all or who has to do what, but all I can say
Right.
is what I've seen that isn't there, and somehow those things need to be at least acknowledged. And that's the thing. I think we're coming to a point now where people are just starting to say that these problems actually exist, and there's never going to be the opportunity to fix them if people don't believe that they're there. And so to look at these people, these 35,000 people in this city who are living under the living wage, half of this city who are living under what they need to just have a baseline survival. We need to look at those people as people and not just numbers and statistics. We need to worry about making sure they have what they need to survive before we make sure more businesses or more beautification or more things like this are being done. Those things are important, but it's really hard to raise the morale with a nice, beautiful park when all of that money could have helped people who are living on the street to survive. And so there just needs to be more people involved from all areas to really understand what the other half is living like.
Yeah. No, very, very well said. And please tell me you're going to run for council next election.
I have very much looked into it. Yes, I'm not sure city council. I've looked into federal government, but we'll see where I go. Somewhere in politics, I'm definitely interested.
You need to be there 100%.
If I've got your support, then I'm there for it.
No, this was an awesome conversation. I'm hearing you loud and clear. These priorities, they may not be all bad, but they certainly don't hit the mark for a lot of people, and we need to figure out how to make them better or how to improve on them. I think, just want to thank everybody for chiming in tonight. There was a few questions here that, maybe we can circle back to. I know that I see Councillor Radwan and Councillor Killen are on or have chimed in on this conversation. We've got Amy McDougall Fraser, who has, I think she had a question back somewhere. I'm just scrolling here to find it. I think she was just saying that there's a lot of unfairness around disability and how we talk about disability. So maybe less of a question. Certainly, Doug James with some spicy comments on Common Council isn't walking the walk. It should not be making proclamations about supporting Disability Awareness Week. Previous example of former Mayor Don Darling hosting his first beer and budgets event at a venue was inaccessible to those who rely on it. Listen, I get it. There's been so many misses where it's like, yeah, we're here, we want to fight for whatever, and then it's like all of a sudden the only people allowed or able to get in the room need to pay $1,000 a plate or something,
Right.
or just can't get up the stairs. So, Doug, it's a spicy comment, but I get it. We don't always do our due diligence to figure out who's in this. Just trying to see. I know Lisa Morris was just talking about bedrooms available, so she was totally with you on that. It's supposedly that there's 3 bedrooms available for 1,000 or 1,100, but she said there's literally last night there was one available in the city. Lots of appreciation, lots of thanks. So I think with that we'll sign off, and I am certainly going to keep engaging with you. I hope you'll keep engaging with us. And
Absolutely.
And
I was really happy to see Paula and Joanna join here, both of which had my support very much in the election. I'm so happy that they're involved, as are you, and things are starting to change. Things are going in the right direction. I just hope we do it faster.
Agreed. All right. Well, high five for tonight, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks, Brent. See you later.
See ya.